Hello everyone, welcome to the interview Beyond Border. This is Betty from China. Now say hi to you from Shanghai, China. At Beyond Border, I will invite guests who have been living and working in different countries and cultures to share with us the valuable lessons that they have learned for their cross-culture journey. Today, let's meet architect and also the founder of the rock brand Urban Fabric, Adrit. Everyone has a special relationship with a city, whether it's people's hometowns or it's where people fall in love for the first time, or it's a place where people build their families. The easiest way to get to know the big picture of the city is always through a map. And there is a person who comes up with the idea of connecting people with their special cities through rocks. And that person is Android, who is the founder of the rock brand Urban Fabric, where people can see the landscape of cities vividly showing up on those beautifully and delicately designed rocks. Andrew came to China as his personal adventure to see the world more than 10 years ago from a small town in Canada. He's a trained architect, meanwhile has cultivated a special interest to details and interior design along the years while he was working for different architect firms. And finally, after some years of professional development, Andre has started his own firm, which also has given birth to his rock brand. So here is the story about Android. So Android, can you briefly introduce yourself and your journey to China?
I was born and raised in Canada. I grew up in a small town called Saskatoon, and I moved to Toronto to study architecture. From Toronto, I was working in architecture. I had a yearning for working and traveling abroad. Many of my classmates were already doing that, and although I was working in Toronto, I had this desire to travel and experience the rest of the world. There was a very close friend of mine from graduate school. He's also an architect, and he was working here in Shanghai. And another friend who I ran into, who is also an architect and had left Shanghai. And I was on this job search, and I made an application to some offices in Shanghai. And I did get a job offer for a Canadian architecture firm based here in Shanghai. And to my surprise, I received an offer in the interview, and I guess I was unprepared for that. I didn't accept right away. I thought I should think about it for a while, and I mulled it over for, I think it must have been a couple of weeks. And during that time, the close friend of mine from graduate school was getting married in Canada, so I saw him and talked about this, and it was very encouraging. He told me China's super interesting, and that the pace of construction was so fast that the tastes of the clients were perhaps more avant-garde. They were taking more chances, and for a young architect, it was a great place to be, a great choice for your career. And I think his words were perhaps among the most encouraging and influential for me. And so I accepted the job opportunity to come here to Shanghai and start working as an architect.
Any cultural misunderstanding or funny moments caused by language barrier?
There was a funny moment, I think, when I was working at my first office, and there were about 70% local mainland Chinese employees to the 30% foreigners. And we had a particular day when we were preparing for, I think, some people from the head office. They were coming to visit, so we were cleaning up the office a little bit. And I sat next to a guy who called himself Superman. So he and I were sitting next to each other, and I was just starting to get a grasp on speaking any Mandarin whatsoever. So it was really quite basic at that time. But I was curious, and I kept asking people, how do you say this? How do you say that? How would I translate these words? I'd like to, try to learn and pick up some language. And we were cleaning up the office, and I found some large renderings of a very cool looking tower project, and I was telling him that I thought this was good, but he looked at me, Superman looked at me, and he wasn't really understanding what I was trying to say, although he was bilingual to a degree. And I asked him, I think this architecture, this design is good, and how do I say good? How? He responded, how? And I thought he was just repeating the beginning of my question. So I asked him again. I said, so how do you say good? How? He would interrupt my question, and he kept saying how. And I didn't know that that was the answer. I thought that he kept just interrupting me and trying to repeat my question back to me. So I got frustrated asking him the same question over and over again, and he just kept interrupting me with the word how. So I finally understood what he was trying to say, and I felt embarrassed because I didn't understand what he was getting at. And so now I know. Yeah.
I know recently you have just launched a new exhibition of your rock brand, Urban Fabric. So can you tell us a little bit about the background story of this brand?
The brand, I studied architecture, and I think part of what I always like to remember about where I studied, University of Toronto, the architecture program, was not a vocational school in the sense that they taught you how to be an architect, an employable architect right away, but like how to draw lines and window details. It was more a conceptual school that taught you how to think about design. And I think that what I really took away from that education was how to conceive of an idea from any scale, from whether it's a chair or a rug or an interior or a hotel or even an urban plan for a city. But I did study architecture, and that was my career path initially, though I started working in interior design where we were doing smaller scale projects and I had more design responsibility. I enjoyed that because I could work with materials and textures and really control the whole project rather than being a piece of a larger project. While I was working in interior design, I developed an affinity for details. We do a lot of custom-made furniture, and we select fabrics. We look through catalogs of stuff that's out there to put products inside of our interior design projects. And I think already I had my mind in this sort of direction of designing in terms of product design. But the impetus for all of this was actually, I was living in Toronto, but my hometown is about 3 hours west of Toronto. So I'd fly home regularly and usually take a window seat on an airplane. And when the plane starts breaking through the cloud cover, there's this moment where you can see the whole landscape. You know, I find it really compelling. It's partly the anticipation of where you're arriving to, but it's also that perspective of the city from above. If you can get a good view on a clear day, to me, it's really wild. And Saskatchewan, the province, is largely agricultural. It's very flat. When you break through the clouds, arriving in the city, Saskatoon, it's just surrounded by this agriculture, and it's very rectilinear, very square, sort of almost even pixelated, vast abstract landscape of greens and golds, and it's really quite, for me, it's beautiful because it reminds me of where I grew up. And I think also it's significant for me. Let's just say that. As I was looking at that, I'd snap a couple of photos, but I thought, hey, that would be kind of cool as a rug. And I didn't think twice about it because, you know, as soon as I landed, I was seeing family and blah, blah, blah. A couple of weeks later, I was back in Toronto, and the IDS, the Interior Design Show Toronto, which is like Canada's largest interior design show, they had a call for entries for young designers to put forward ideas that were either in prototype stage or were simply just ideas, because they wanted to showcase in a section of the interior design show they want to showcase these new and fresh ideas. And I think the IDS organization has always been very good at encouraging this kind of stuff. And so I thought about submitting something, and I took one of those photographs from my recent trip, and just in Photoshop, I cut it into a rectangle, and I rolled the corner up to make it look like it was a textile or a rug. And I wrote a little abstract to say that this is the prairie rug. It's a piece of home that I can roll up and take with me anywhere in the world that I go. And so not long after that, I received a letter saying that the submission was approved and that they wanted to have my rug in the exhibition in a couple of months. Well, I knew nothing about making rugs. I knew how to make photos and maybe make a proposal. I had zero knowledge about rugs. And so I pretty quickly I learned how to do this. I connected with a manufacturer there locally and did a couple of trials. I made my first rug and submitted it for exhibited at the interior design show. And so that was the first idea of an aerial rug. But shortly thereafter is when I moved to Shanghai. And in Shanghai, this tremendous metropolis that just goes, as far as the eye can see in all directions. It's just really awe-inspiring. It's really especially coming from a smaller place in Canada, to land here, it was really wow. And as you know, when you come to a new place, you're always looking at a map to orient yourself. As well, I was working in architecture, and so when we were designing a specific building, you would look at the building site, and you look at what, whether there's a waterfront or a busy road, you look at what factors are around the building project and what would influence the design of this project. So my point is I was looking at maps a lot, and eventually I was compelled to represent Shanghai as a rug as well. I thought that would be really, really cool because the city is just so enormous. And so Shanghai became my first city map. And the name urban fabric, that's actually a term that urban planners use to describe how a city is put together, or rather how it is woven together. For example, you have a city with a waterfront like Barcelona, or a city with the Huangpu winding its way through the center. And so you have the Bund. You have open spaces or monuments and large areas that were new construction versus the old Gothic quarter. And how these things all combine is what defines the city's fabric. And so this urban fabric is, I saw it as a double entendre. Like it's a term referring to the makeup of a city, but in my context, with a series of textiles, urban fabric also meant something else. I liked that name, and so it stuck.
Can you introduce us one or two pieces of the most unique rug works from your brand?
Absolutely. Well, one that comes to mind immediately is one that you probably saw at this exhibition that we had here in Shanghai recently. And that's the corner splat. This is a rug that's part of a limited edition that was designed in collaboration with Jimenez Lai. He's the founder of Bureau Spectacular in Los Angeles. And Jimenez, he wanted to challenge the notion or even the role of the rug, the textile, and its relationship to architecture, because typically a rug sits in the center of a room. It's ornamental in nature, and it's a two-dimensional object. Likewise, if it were hung on the wall as a tapestry, it has an ornamental function, and it's sort of limited to this. So we started talking about a limited edition collection, and within the collection there are 3 or 4 different designs, but this one, corner splat, is particularly interesting because it sort of suggests, why couldn't a rug be on the floor and the wall at the same time? Or why couldn't it occupy the corner of a room? Why do we have to think so conventionally about these textiles? So corner splat literally fits in the corner where it occupies 2 adjacent walls and a section of the floor. and in so doing, it creates a completely sort of different relationship with architecture. It's almost spatial. It's almost creates a nook or a comfortable place to sit, and I find that one pretty interesting. And actually, Jimenez himself is just a very interesting individual. And another rug in that collection is one that, again, speaking about the relationship with rugs and architecture, he questions whether usually the rug is added as a secondary layer to architecture, which means that the architecture was there first and then the rug was added afterwards. But he suggested that maybe the relationship could be flipped, and that perhaps the rug was already there and the architecture was built around it or on top of it. So we have another rug, which the working title was Between Two Rooms, but its formal name now is Shadows of Things We Wish We Had. He's quite a storyteller, and the rugs themselves are great, but I'll try to get to the point here. So Between Two Rooms is a large round rug that is sold cut in half, and half the rug rests in one room up against the wall, and the other half is on the other side of the wall. So you would have a rug that sort of spans in between two rooms, travels through the wall. And of course, we sell the rug as a solid piece as well, but the design is intended to be split between two rooms. So I find those quite fascinating as rug designs, because they break with the conventional notion of what is a rug and how we use it.
So as an architect, I know you need to put various cultural factors into consideration when you build a house or a building. So how do you understand the relationship between people and culture?
Well, I think the architecture, I mean, we're creating an environment for living and for working, and it's almost like you have to have an understanding of people's behaviors, almost from a cultural and maybe even a psychological perspective. We're looking at human behavior and specific to a culture, the context of our building. So you want to understand how do people actually use these spaces. But for example, if you look at high-rise architecture in Canada versus China, you get a lot of balconies. I think in Canada, even though it's a cold climate, people keep their balconies because we really love those summer months, the spring, summer months. We want that outdoor space, and we cherish it. We put chairs out there and candles and a little table, and we'll spend as much time as we can outside when the weather's good. Meanwhile, I'm looking around here at the balconies in Jing'an, and a lot of them are enclosed because they've become laundry rooms. They've become extra storage space, and I think the outdoor space is less hospitable. It's, we have a warm climate. People like to stay in a more climate-controlled comfort, but balcony spaces on architecture in China, I find, is a lot less utilized. So that's more about how people use the building, use the space. I think from a cultural angle, there's a recent example. We were working on a villa design, and so we were doing, the basic layout, right, from ground up construction. And this is a villa for a family in Ireland. And it's not uncommon, but it was a very important point to the family that the kitchen was the center of the home, because to them it wasn't a dining room, it wasn't a formal dining room, or it wasn't some kind of ostentatious lobby. Their interests were not in making something that was to show off their wealth or to. It was about comfort, and it was about family. And to them, the kitchen had to be the largest space. the most visually connected to other areas in the house, and it was a generous and a privileged spot in the floor plan. So really, it became the hinge of the whole house. We had a large kitchen with a kitchen island. It was adjacent to the garden doors that walked out into the backyard, where they had a swimming pool and a nice landscape. But we also introduced some openings in the ceiling that connected to the second floor hallways next to the children's bedrooms and stuff. So there was a visual connection also to where the kids were. Actually, it was connected to where they had a reading room and a playroom. So there was a visual connection between that children's social space and the overall kitchen space, which was more of the family social space.
And what do you think the benefits are brought to you by traveling and immersing yourself in other cultures?
I think traveling and experiencing all of these places that we represent as rugs, it gives me insight into the culture, food, architecture, the people, and that can often inform design decisions that are made as part of the city that we represent. Like, for example, which part of a certain city that we would represent in a map, or what colors we would use to illustrate that. So, like, for example, what part of the city should we represent? Berlin had been divided between East and West Berlin for a long time. Everybody has heard of the Berlin Wall. So our Berlin rug actually acknowledges this, and down the middle of the Berlin rug, we actually change colors half between East and West to sort of acknowledge that difference. And I think that's visually kind of interesting as a remnant of the history of that place. But maybe a different example would be, we recently designed a rug of Saigon, Ho Chi Minh City. And this one is not, because I lived there for 4 years and I loved it there. And I was really immersed in that culture. And it's very tropical and it's colorful, and people are wonderful. I really did love it. And also, I think the built form is kind of unique there too. It has to do with design in tropical environments, but it also had to do with just the way the city was built. They have tall, narrow structures because I think as a commercial property was charged by the linear meters of street front that were sold to every particular plot. So you had very narrow houses, but then they were extruded very, very high, and they called them tube houses or tunnel houses. And I find that they're quirky. They're quite interesting in appearance, and they're also usually painted with bright tropical colors. Nevertheless, the point was that we designed this rug of Ho Chi Minh City, and it's not a typical aerial perspective of the city. It's actually, I was derived from a photograph I took from my old residence towards a low-rise suburban area, mainly composed of these tube houses, and they're really closely packed together, very densely packed together, and every one of them has their own individual color that has no relationship with the others. They're all just representing their individuality, and it's an interesting, colorful mosaic. And so this rug is now an abstracted pattern of the Lane House roof lines in one of these denser quarters of Saigon, and it's represented in a wide palette of pastels and different shades of white, some freshly painted white and some that are very old and bleached from the sun. And to me, that was a very unique part of the visual aspect of being in Saigon, of being immersed in that city.
In today's world, what do you think the main barrier for people from different cultures to get to know each other, and how can we do better?
Well, I think a lot of people are very immersed in their own world in their own lives, and maybe they don't imagine or consider what it's like to live on the other side of the planet, or what it's like to live in a different continent. Perhaps they haven't traveled themselves, or they don't care to know the other people and what their history and what their culture is. And so I think the more I personally have exposed myself to people from other cultures, speaking with them, inquiring about their lives, learning about it, either through personal anecdotes or through a book or through travel, the more I expose myself to it, the more I understand. And I think the more understanding you have, the more, I don't know, you can have more affection towards something. You can have more of an understanding and appreciation, rather, of the upbringing or the history and culture of a different people. But staying too much in one place and not opening your eyes to the diverse type of people that are out there, I don't think that's necessarily going to help communication with other cultures. I really think the communication barrier benefits greatly when people have an open mind and they actually have a desire to get to know these people that are different from them. And no, I mean, I think the internet can provide good information, but it's only as good as where you look for it. I don't think you're going to find the best, most accurate information, unbiased information in certain channels on the internet. You can find, really inaccurate information there, as well as accurate information. I think, as I said, I think traveling to those places and if you have the opportunity to immerse yourself in another culture, even if it is for a couple of weeks or a month, or several years, like myself. But I think that does shed some light on another culture, and it does provide you a greater understanding, and keep an open mind. And I think having an inquisitive nature is very healthy, to not just take something you read at face value, but maybe you can take note of it in your head, but make your decision when you actually have some experience. Make that decision when you actually talk to somebody from that culture, and even ask them about, hey, I read something like this. Is that actually true, or is this sort of misinformed? I don't know. I think it's dangerous to just sit at home and pretend that you know everything just because you read it on Facebook.
So this is my conversation with Android. As an architect, Android understands the important connection and relationship between people and culture since the very beginning of his career. People's behaviors are influenced by the cultural environment that's surrounding them, and that's why every house, every building is tailor designed. And people have special emotional connections to the cultural environment that they're associating with. And that's why people fall in love with Andres Rocks, when people can see and feel relate to the city they love. Another thing I cannot agree with Andre more is the danger of imagining one can fully learn and understand the holistic face of any foreign culture through reading or learning knowledge or information online alone, without getting any contact in the real world. In 21st century, it is probably more valuable to always keep a reasonable doubt somewhere in our mind about any knowledge or information we have learned about other culture or people from other cultures before we have experience of interacting with them in the real life and at in-depth level. And so this is today's show. My name is Betty, and I'll see you next time. Bye.